Welcome to Tranquil Sleep, where soothing stories and gentle narration help you find deep rest. Before we begin tonight's story, take a slow, steady breath in and let it out softly. Allow your eyes to close and feel the gentle weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. Wherever you are, imagine yourself wrapped in the comfort of a warm blanket, safe and still. While outside your window, a cool evening breeze carries the faint sound of rain against the glass. Let the rhythm of that sound calm your mind, the way the hush of the ocean calms the shore. Tonight's story will take us to Paris. Not the busy Paris of daylight and crowded cafes, but the quiet Paris of twilight, when the lamps begin to glow and the air carries a faint shimmer of mist over the cobblestones. This is a story about wandering softly through the heart of the city when everything slows and the world feels as if it's breathing in time with you. So now take one more deep breath in and exhale slowly. Let the last thoughts of your day drift away and allow yourself to step gently into the stillness of evening, into the calm, glowing streets of a quiet evening in Paris. The rain had stopped just before sunset. The clouds that had lingered all afternoon had begun to thin, their pale grey dissolving into a soft, lavender haze that hung over the rooftops. From her small apartment window in Montmartre, a young woman named Elise watched the golden lights flicker on, one by one across the hills and narrow lanes. The rooftops of Paris, slate blue, silver-tipped, and glistening faintly from the earlier rain, stretched out like folded pages of a storybook beneath the fading sky. Elise leaned her chin on her hand, smiling softly to herself. She loved this time of day, when the city seemed to exhale, when the laughter of the afternoon faded into murmurs and the soft hum of evening began to rise. Inside, her small apartment was warm and tidy. A pot of chamomile tea rested on the counter, steam curling lazily toward the ceiling. The scent of lemon and honey mingled with the faint aroma of rain through the open window. On the tiny table beside the window sat an open book, its pages turned slightly by the breeze, and beside it a sketchbook filled with quick pencil drawings of the city she loved. Tonight, she decided, she would take her usual walk through the quiet streets. It was her favorite ritual, a slow, peaceful stroll through the evening, past the bakeries closing for the night, past the quiet cafes where couples whispered over wine, past the soft glow of lamps reflected in puddles on the cobblestones. She slipped on her coat, wrapped a pale blue scarf around her neck, and stepped out into the evening air. The first thing she felt was the freshness, that clean, cool scent that comes after rain when the world seems newly washed. The second was the sound, the rhythmic, echoing hush of her own footsteps against the damp stones of the narrow street. Montmartre at night was a world apart from the city below. The hill, with its winding lanes and quiet stairways, felt almost like a village, a place suspended between dream and waking, where the lamps burned golden and the air shimmered faintly with mist. She walked slowly, letting her mind wander, noticing the way the droplets on the iron railings caught the lamplight and turned to tiny sparks of silver. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a soft, lingering melody on an accordion, a tune that floated through the air like a sigh, melancholy and beautiful. Elise followed the sound until she came to the corner of Rue des Trois Frères, where a small square opened up between two cafes. The musician stood beneath a gas lamp, his hat tipped low, his hands moving gracefully over the worn keys of his instrument. A few people lingered nearby, a couple sharing an umbrella, an old man with a baguette tucked under his arm. But most simply walked past. their faces lit by the golden light as they disappeared into the mist. Elise paused, her heart swelling with that familiar ache, the kind that only beauty, unexpected and fleeting, can bring. The music seemed to weave itself through the air, curling into every shadow, filling every quiet space. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling her heartbeat slow to match the rhythm of the song. The world around her faded. The damp cobblestones, the lamplight, even the faint hum of the city below, until there was only sound and stillness and the warmth of being utterly present. When the song ended, she opened her eyes again and smiled at the musician. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, and began to play another tune, something lighter, almost playful, as if to thank her for listening. Elise dropped a few coins into his case, and as she turned to leave, she noticed how the puddles at her feet shimmered with reflections, not just of the lamps, but of the moon now breaking through the clouds. The moon had risen quietly, soft and round, casting a silvery glow over the rooftops. Elise continued her walk, her shoes brushing through the shallow puddles, sending ripples that scattered the light like scattered dreams. Every window she passed seemed to tell a story. A family sharing dinner around a small wooden table, a painter cleaning his brushes beside a half-finished canvas, a cat watching the world with half-closed eyes from a windowsill. The city felt alive, but in a peaceful way, not bustling or loud, but breathing, gentle, rhythmic. She turned onto Rue Gabrielle, where ivy climbed the walls and the scent of baking bread lingered faintly from the boulangerie at the corner. The air was cooler here, and she drew her scarf a little tighter. A light drizzle began to fall again. Not heavy, just a fine mist that made the air sparkle when it passed through the streetlights. She smiled, tilting her face upward, letting the droplets cool her skin. It reminded her of childhood, running through summer rain in her grandmother's garden, barefoot, laughing, while the scent of wet earth filled the air. The memory felt close enough to touch, like a dream she could almost step back into. Eventually, Elise reached the steps that led up toward the Sacré-Cœur Basilica. The long stairway curved upward, lined on either side by old stone walls and flickering lanterns. She climbed slowly, not hurrying, her breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. From halfway up, she paused and looked back. Below her, Paris stretched out like a painting, a sea of rooftops and golden lights, the Seine glinting faintly in the distance, bridges arched like ribbons across the water. It was breathtaking, the way the city seemed both infinite and intimate at once. She stood there for a long moment, her heart filled with quiet gratitude. The rain had stopped again, leaving only the soft sound of dripping water from the eaves and the occasional flutter of wings as a bird settled into its nest. It felt as if the whole city were preparing for sleep. At the top of the hill, the basilica rose white against the deepening sky. The great domes were touched by moonlight, their surfaces gleaming softly as if carved from pearl. The wide steps before it were nearly empty, save for a few figures sitting quietly, their voices low, their laughter fading gently into the distance. Elise sat down on the cool stone, folding her coat around her, and watched the city below. The view was vast and serene, a sea of gold and silver lights twinkling beneath the night. The wind moved softly through her hair, carrying with it the scent of rain, of faraway fires, and the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine. She closed her eyes, listening. The distant hum of traffic blended with the whisper of wind through the trees. Somewhere, faintly, she could still hear the accordion, that same gentle melody, now carried on the breeze like a lullaby. And as she sat there, Time seemed to slow. Her thoughts, which had danced restlessly all day, began to quiet. The city, the music, the moon, all of it wove together into something soft and timeless, a moment suspended perfectly between wakefulness and dream. A few drops of rain began to fall again, landing lightly on her coat and scarf. She opened her eyes just enough to see the moon through the thin veil of cloud, its light diffused into a halo. It was peaceful beyond words, a silence that felt alive, a stillness that held the heartbeat of 1,000 dreams. She breathed in deeply and exhaled slowly. The night around her seemed to breathe too. For a while, she simply sat there, watching the world shimmer below, feeling herself soften into the rhythm of the rain. And in that quiet moment, it was easy to believe that every drop of rain carried a whisper of peace, that every flickering light below was someone else finding rest. The rain had quieted again, leaving behind only a soft shimmer upon the streets, as though the entire city had been polished to a quiet glow by the fingertips of twilight itself. Elise remained seated on the broad steps of the Sacré-Cœur, her gaze drifting across the skyline, where 1,000 little windows flickered like fireflies, each one holding a story, a life, a tiny pocket of warmth against the cool night air. Below her, the murmurs of the city had faded to a hush, a sound like the gentle turning of pages in an old book, a rhythm both steady and endlessly comforting. She drew her scarf a little tighter around her neck, feeling the texture of the soft wool against her skin, and let out a slow breath that rose like mist into the air. The cool breeze brushed past her cheeks, carrying the scent of rain-washed stone and the faint sweetness of blooming magnolia. And somewhere in the distance, the echo of laughter drifted upward, light and far away, like the ghost of a memory. The night felt endless and intimate all at once, as though the whole of Paris were cradled in a single, tender breath. When Elise finally rose to her feet, the motion felt dreamlike, as though she were being gently guided not by her own will, but by the quiet pull of the city itself, an unseen rhythm that beckoned her to follow. She began to walk slowly down the long steps, her shoes tapping softly against the damp stone, each footfall echoing into the cool silence of the hour. The rain had left behind tiny rivers along the curbsides, trickling and shimmering beneath the glow of the street lamp, their surfaces trembling with reflected gold. As she descended into the winding streets of Montmartre once more, the lamps along the narrow lanes burned low and steady, casting long, honey-coloured pools of light upon the cobblestones, and every now and then a window would spill a rectangle of warm illumination out onto the street, revealing a quiet glimpse of life inside. Someone reading by lamplight, a small cat stretching on a windowsill, a vase of tulips bending gently in the evening breeze. It was these small, delicate moments that Elise loved most about Paris, the way it seemed to exist not only as a city, but as a collection of secret sighs, soft, hidden, human moments suspended between the heartbeats of time. As she turned down Rue Lamarck, the faint sound of jazz drifted from a nearby cafe, a slow, lilting tune that mingled perfectly with the sound of the rain returning in whispers. The droplets began to fall again, barely visible, just enough to leave tiny, glistening beads upon her hair and coat. She didn't mind. There was something soothing in it, the rhythm of rain, the quiet murmur of the city half asleep, the warmth of her own breath moving gently in the cool air. Ahead, a lamppost flickered, its light pulsing softly as though it were breathing too, and beneath it, a small cat darted across the street, pausing only to glance back with eyes that caught the light like molten amber. Elise smiled faintly, and as she passed, she whispered a quiet goodnight. Though she knew the creature was already gone, vanished into the folds of shadow and rain. The streets were nearly empty now, and that emptiness did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful, as though the city had folded itself inward, tucking its stories away for the night. Each doorway she passed seemed to hold a secret, a whisper of conversation behind the glass, a candle burning low beside a vase of fading flowers, a note of piano drifting faintly from somewhere unseen. The rain fell a little steadier now, and she pulled her hood over her hair, walking slowly, letting the sound of the droplets fill her ears the way a lullaby fills the heart. Steady, soft, eternal. It was then, as she turned the corner onto a small, sloping lane she had never taken before, that she saw it. A narrow, glowing doorway nestled between two tall buildings, so subtle she might have missed it, if not for the way the light seemed to shimmer faintly through the mist. A sign above the door, written in curling gold letters, read, La Librairie du Clair de Lune, the Moonlight Bookshop. The name made her smile. It sounded like something out of a dream. Through the fogged window panes, she could see shelves upon shelves of books, their spines glinting in the golden light, and a small lamp burning near the counter, casting a halo over an open notebook. The door, painted a deep shade of blue, stood slightly ajar, as if quietly inviting her in. Without a second thought, Elise stepped forward, pushed it open, and crossed the threshold. The air inside was warm, thick with the comforting scent of paper, ink, and rain-damp wool. It felt like stepping into another world, a cocoon of calm and golden light, where time had slowed to the pace of a heartbeat. Tiny bells above the door chimed softly as she entered, their delicate sound dissolving into the hush of the shop. Rows of tall wooden shelves reached nearly to the ceiling, each one lined with old books whose edges were softened by time and touch. The floorboards creaked faintly underfoot, and the sound seemed to blend seamlessly with the steady patter of rain outside. In one corner, near a small round table draped in lace, stood a vintage lamp with a shade of amber glass, its light glowing like a captured sunset. Elise took a slow breath and felt her whole body begin to relax, her shoulders softening, her mind quieting, her heartbeat finding a calm, unhurried rhythm once more. "Bonsoir," came a gentle voice from behind the counter. An elderly man, thin and kind-eyed, looked up from a book he had been reading. His grey hair was tied neatly back, and a pair of round spectacles rested halfway down his nose. "Bonsoir," Elise replied softly, her voice sounding small against the vast stillness of the room. "Quite the evening for wandering," the man said, smiling as he closed his book and stood. "The rain seems to have made the whole city quieter than usual." "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Peaceful. I didn't even know this bookshop was here." He nodded, his smile deepening. "Few do. It tends to find its way to those who need a little quiet, and perhaps a little story to keep them company." His words lingered in the air, gentle and mysterious, as though he had spoken them not to her mind, but to her heart. "Please," he added, gesturing toward the shelves, "take your time. You'll find that the books here have a way of choosing their readers." Elise wandered slowly through the aisles, her fingertips brushing over the worn spines, reading the faded titles stamped in gold and silver. There were books of poetry, travel journals filled with delicate sketches, old French novels bound in deep red leather, and small volumes of fairy tales whose pages smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Each book seemed to hum quietly, as if holding within it not just words, but the breath of every reader who had ever turned its pages. Near the back of the shop, she found a low shelf illuminated by a single, flickering candle. On it, rested a thin, pale blue book with no title on the cover, only a small, silver moon embossed at its center. Something about it drew her in. She lifted it carefully, feeling the soft texture of the cover beneath her fingertips, and opened it to the first page. The handwriting inside was elegant and looping, and though the ink had faded slightly, the words shimmered faintly in the light, as though they had been written in moonlight. She began to read. To the wanderer who finds this book, know that you are never truly alone. Every city has its dreamers, and every dreamer leaves behind a whisper, a trace of wonder carried on the evening wind. Follow the rain, listen to the silence between the bells, and let the night guide you to where stories sleep. Elise smiled softly, the words sinking into her like a lullaby. She turned another page, but the next few were blank, empty, pure, waiting, it seemed, for something yet to be written. She closed the book gently, holding it to her chest, and for a moment she could almost feel a pulse beneath her palms, as if the book itself were alive, breathing, dreaming, waiting. "Ah," said the bookseller quietly from behind her, his voice calm and knowing. "So, it has found you." Elise turned, blinking in surprise. "What do you mean?" He smiled, his eyes warm and faintly amused. Every so often a visitor discovers that book. It never stays on the same shelf for long, and it always seems to appear only when someone needs a bit of peace. She looked down at the book again, tracing the silver moon with her thumb. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice soft as candlelight. "It's a reminder, perhaps, that even in the quietest moments, we are part of something larger, a story that continues long after the page turns." The rain outside had deepened into a soft, steady rhythm, tapping gently against the glass. The sound filled the little shop, soothing, hypnotic, like a heartbeat in the distance. The man poured 2 small cups of tea from a porcelain pot behind the counter, steam curling upward in delicate ribbons. He handed one to Elise, and together they sat at the small table beneath the amber lamp, sipping in silence, the warmth of the tea spreading through their hands and into the quiet night. The world outside faded, the streets, the rain, the hum of the city, until there was only this, the soft turning of pages, the flicker of lamplight, and the steady, comforting pulse of calm that filled the room like a slow, gentle tide. The rain continued its patient song outside the bookshop, each droplet tracing a silver thread down the window panes, weaving the world beyond into a shimmering watercolor of light and shadow, where every glow from a passing car, every flicker from a lamp, bloomed and faded softly, as though the night itself were sighing. Elise sat at the small round table beneath the amber lamp, the pale blue book resting open before her, its pages alive with faint reflections of the flickering candle beside it. The scent of tea, delicate and floral, drifted upward, mingling with the comforting fragrance of old paper, creating an atmosphere that felt not entirely real, but rather suspended somewhere between dream and memory. The old bookseller watched her quietly from behind his spectacles, his expression unreadable, though kind, as if he had seen this moment countless times before, as though the shop itself had its own way of bringing people exactly what their hearts needed to remember. For a long time, Elise simply listened. To the rain, to the clock ticking softly on the back wall, to the nearly imperceptible hum of silence that fills places where time moves more slowly than anywhere else. Then, as though compelled by an invisible hand, she turned the page. The book's ink seemed to shimmer faintly again, the letters curling across the paper like smoke, and she began to read. In a city much like this one, there once was a dreamer who wandered through the rain, searching for something she could not name. She believed it was a place, or perhaps a feeling, something that had been waiting for her all along. She followed the rhythm of the rain, the glow of distant windows and the whisper of bells that only rang when the heart was still enough to listen. And one evening, beneath the softest drizzle of moonlight, she found herself standing before a bookshop that shimmered faintly in the mist. Elise paused, her breath catching quietly in her chest. She glanced up at the room around her, the rows of shelves, the amber lamp, the rain, and for a fleeting moment it felt as though she were reading not a story but her own reflection upon the page. She turned another page, and the words seemed to flow more fluidly now, as though the book recognized her presence. Inside, the air was warm and golden, filled with the scent of dust and candle wax and quiet dreams. An old man sat behind the counter, his eyes kind and knowing, and he greeted the dreamer not as a stranger, but as one long expected. He offered her tea and silence, and the kind of calm that cannot be spoken, only felt, like a gentle tide pulling at the edge of thought. The hairs at the back of Elise's neck tingled, but not from fear, from a kind of deep recognition, as though the book were breathing the same air as her thoughts. She traced a fingertip along the faint, silver moon embossed at the top of the page. It felt slightly warm to the touch, and the moment her skin brushed it, the air in the shop seemed to shift. Not dramatically, but like a quiet change in the wind. The ticking clock grew slower, the rain outside softer still, and the light from the lamp took on a subtle pulse, as though glowing in rhythm with her own breathing. She blinked once, twice, and the world seemed to waver, as if two layers of reality were sliding gently over one another, like silk upon silk. The shop remained, and yet it didn't. The bookshelves seemed to stretch taller, the shadows deepened, and somewhere far away, she thought she could hear the faint echo of piano notes. Slow, wistful, delicate, each one suspended in the rain-soaked air. The bookseller's voice came softly through the haze. "You see it now, don't you?" Elise turned to him, startled but calm. "See what?" He smiled faintly, his eyes shining like candlelight through glass. "The thread that connects dreams and waking. The moment you stop searching and simply listen, the world begins to unfold its quieter truths." His words drifted through her like a breeze, so light, so simple, and yet they carried the weight of something ancient and gentle. "The story you hold," he continued, "is older than the pages it's written on. It appears when someone's heart is ready to rest, to remember what peace feels like." Elise lowered her gaze to the book again, the golden light glinting along the curve of its spine. The next pages were no longer filled with words. Instead, faint shapes began to form. Sketches of streets and rooftops, softly glowing like silver ink beneath water. And then, quietly, the drawings began to move. The lamplight flickered, and the rain upon the window seemed to melt into the scene within the pages. The rooftops shimmered, the clouds rolled, and suddenly she could see herself. A small figure walking beneath an umbrella along a cobblestone path that looked very much like the one she had walked earlier that night. Her breath trembled. She reached forward, and as her fingers brushed the paper, the soft edges between page and air dissolved completely. The scent of rain deepened, the sound of the clock faded, and the whisper of piano grew louder. Not frightening, not strange, but comforting, like a melody she had known her entire life and forgotten until now. When she blinked again, she was no longer sitting at the table. She stood in the middle of a narrow Parisian street, the same one she had seen on the page. The rain was light and silver, falling through the glow of street lamps like threads of silk. Behind her, the window of the bookshop glowed softly, and inside, she could see the old bookseller still seated at his desk, reading quietly, as though nothing had changed at all. "Bonsoir," Elise whispered to herself, the sound blending into the rain. It was strange. Everything around her felt real, and yet it shimmered faintly as though each object were made of light and breath. She walked forward slowly, her footsteps making barely a sound. The rain didn't chill her now. It wrapped around her gently, like the softest shawl. Each droplet seemed to hum with a quiet warmth, and when she tilted her head back to look at the sky, she could see the faint glimmer of stars behind the clouds, as if the heavens themselves were smiling. The narrow lane opened into a quiet square, one she had never seen before, and yet somehow knew by heart. A single fountain stood in its center, its water reflecting the amber lights of nearby windows. Beneath a canopy of flowering trees, tiny lamps hung from the branches, swaying gently in the rain. It was the kind of place that could only exist between waking and dreaming, too delicate, too perfect, to belong entirely to either world. And seated beside the fountain, her hands folded neatly in her lap, was a woman in a soft grey coat, reading a book with a pale blue cover. Elise's breath caught in her throat. She approached slowly, the world around her growing quieter with each step, until even the rain seemed to hold its breath. When the woman looked up, Elise felt something inside her shift, a gentle recognition that was both impossible and inevitable. The woman's face was like her own, but older, calmer, as though she had seen every storm and found peace within each one. The woman smiled. "You've found your way," she said softly. "I was beginning to wonder when you would." Elise could not speak. She felt as though every word in her chest had dissolved into light. The woman closed the book and held it out to her. "It's your story now," she said. "All it ever needed was for you to slow down long enough to listen." As Elise reached out and took the book, the rain softened to a whisper, and the lamps above her flickered, their glow stretching into gentle, golden halos that filled the air. The fountain's ripples slowed, the scent of night-blooming flowers deepened, and for a long, endless moment, the entire world seemed to breathe with her, a single, steady exhale of peace. Then softly, the woman's form began to fade, not disappear, but dissolve into the same silver mist that curled through the air, as though she were returning to the dream from which she came. "Remember," she whispered, her voice as light as falling rain, "the quiet is never empty. It is where your heart comes home to rest." And then she was gone. Elise stood for a long time beside the fountain, the book pressed gently to her chest, the world around her bathed in stillness. The lamps shimmered softly above, their light reflecting upon the surface of the water, and the faintest smile touched her lips, a quiet recognition that she was exactly where she was meant to be. When she finally turned to walk away, the rain had stopped completely, and Paris, that sleeping, dreaming city, glowed softly around her, like a lullaby whispered by the stars themselves. When Elise opened her eyes again, it was to the pale, tender light of dawn, filtering softly through her window, a delicate wash of gold and grey that touched the corners of her room like the first sigh of waking after a long, beautiful dream, the kind that lingers in your chest even after the details have begun to fade. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, and the world outside her window was washed clean, glistening faintly beneath the newborn light. The rooftop still carried small beads of silver dew, the that caught the morning sun like threads of glass. The air, cool and moist, drifted in through the open window, carrying with it the faint perfume of rain-soaked stone and the first notes of birdsong echoing between the narrow streets of Montmartre. For a long moment, Elise didn't move. She lay still beneath her blanket, her breath slow and even, feeling the soft weight of the morning pressing gently against her. It was as though the city itself were whispering her back into wakefulness, careful not to startle her from the serenity that clung to her like silk. Her eyes fluttered open fully, and she turned her head slightly toward the small wooden table beside her bed, and there, resting upon its surface, lay the pale blue book. She blinked once, her heartbeat quiet but steady. The book was exactly as she remembered it, its cover smooth, faintly iridescent in the morning light, and the little silver moon embossed on its surface glowed ever so faintly, as though still carrying the last shimmer of the dream she had wandered through. Had she brought it home with her? Had the old bookseller given it to her? Or had it simply followed her back, the way a melody sometimes lingers in your thoughts after you've stopped listening to it? The questions drifted through her mind like gentle ripples upon water, but she didn't try to answer them. Instead, she sat up slowly, the blanket pooling softly around her, and she ran her fingers lightly over the book's cover. The texture was cool and familiar. When she opened it, she found that most of the pages were blank, save for the faint, ghost-like outlines of streets, rooftops, and tiny silver stars, as though the story she had read the night before had dissolved into light and memory. And on one of the final pages, in delicate script that shimmered faintly when it caught the light, were the words, "The quiet is never empty. It is where your heart comes home to rest." Elise smiled faintly, her chest filling with a warmth that felt older than memory. She traced the words with the tip of her finger and closed the book, holding it to her heart. The sound of the city beginning to stir, a soft clatter of dishes from a nearby cafe, the roll of a bicycle tire over damp cobblestones, a door creaking open somewhere below, filled the silence with life. It was morning, and yet it felt like the continuation of a dream. After washing and dressing, Elise slipped into her long beige coat, wrapped her scarf around her neck, and stepped outside into the quiet Paris morning. The air was crisp and pure, each breath filling her lungs with that cool sweetness that comes only after rain. The streets were still, bathed in the soft blush of dawn, their cobblestones gleaming faintly beneath the low sunlight. Montmartre at this hour was almost sacred, a place where the world moved half asleep, unhurried, as though time itself had decided to rest a little longer. The bakeries had begun to open, and the scent of fresh bread drifted through the air, warm and inviting, mingling with the faint aroma of roasted coffee. She walked slowly, her steps light, her senses open to everything around her. Every window she passed seemed to glow with quiet life. A woman arranging flowers in a vase, a man reading a newspaper beside his steaming cup of espresso, a cat stretching luxuriously on a windowsill as though savoring the peace of the morning. The clouds that had blanketed the city through the night were parting now, revealing streaks of pale blue sky tinged with gold. The sunlight touched the wet pavement, and the puddles reflected the rooftops and chimneys above like fragments of an upside-down dream. Elise paused at a small cafe she often visited, one tucked neatly between two narrow shops whose windows were filled with trinkets and postcards that seemed never to change. She ordered her usual, a croissant, buttery and warm, and a cup of coffee, served in a small porcelain cup that fit perfectly in her hands. She took her seat by the window, the one she always chose, where she could watch the world unfold at its gentlest pace. As she sipped her coffee, she opened the pale blue book once more. The pages still shimmered faintly, and though most were blank, she noticed that one new line had appeared since the morning. Each day begins where the dream left off. Her lips curved into a quiet smile. She felt somehow that the book was not finished, that it would continue to write itself in its own time, in the quiet moments between one heartbeat and the next. Outside, the city was waking, slowly, softly, beautifully. A man in a long coat walked past carrying a bouquet of lilies wrapped in paper. A child in a red raincoat splashed through a puddle, laughing. The bells of Sacré-Cœur began to toll in the distance, their chimes soft and melodic, echoing through the mist like the voice of something ancient and kind. Elise leaned back in her chair, her eyes half closed, and let the sound wash over her. The rhythm of the bells mingled with the murmur of footsteps, the faint whisper of leaves stirring in the wind, and the slow, steady beating of her own heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt utterly still. Not in body, but in spirit. The kind of stillness that comes when one stops reaching for meaning and simply allows the world to be. Later that afternoon, Elise wandered again through the streets, drawn by a quiet curiosity she could not quite explain. The book was tucked beneath her arm, its weight comforting, familiar. She passed the square where the musician had played his accordion the night before, and for a moment she could almost hear the echo of his song still hanging in the air. The cobblestones were dry now, but they still glistened faintly where the last of the rainwater lingered in their grooves. The sky was pale and soft, threaded with thin wisps of clouds that drifted lazily toward the horizon. The sunlight was diffused, tender, wrapping every building in a gentle warmth that seemed to reach not just the skin, but the soul beneath it. She walked without hurry, her fingers brushing the cool iron of railings, her eyes catching on the way the light danced through window glass, scattering into tiny rainbows that appeared and vanished as she moved. When she turned onto Rue des Trois Frères again, she felt a small shiver of recognition. The bookshop. But where it had stood the night before, the warm golden glow behind its window, the soft sound of rain tapping against the glass. There was now only a shuttered storefront. The sign above the door was faded, the windows dusty. There was no light, no scent of tea, no trace of the man with the kind eyes. And yet Elise didn't feel disappointment. Instead, she smiled softly because somehow she knew that it was right. Places like that were never meant to stay in one place. They existed in moments, in moods, in the soft edge between dreaming and waking, appearing only when one was quiet enough to find them. She stood there for a while, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden doorframe. The paint was chipped, the brass handle cool beneath her touch. Somewhere deep within her, she felt the faint hum of recognition again. That same vibration she had felt in the bookshop when the rain fell and the piano played softly in the distance. It was still there, she realized, and not outside of her, but within her. The quiet, the calm, the magic of that night. She wandered back up toward the steps of Sacré-Cœur as the day stretched lazily into late afternoon. The air was still and luminous, the kind of golden light that makes even the simplest things, a leaf fluttering down from a tree, a bird landing on a railing, feel touched by grace. When she reached the top, the city unfolded before her once more, vast and glimmering. The rooftops caught the sunlight like 1,000 mirrors, and the Seine wound its gentle path through the heart of it all, silver and serene. She sat on the same step as before, her hands resting lightly upon the pale blue book. The pages stirred faintly in the breeze, as though breathing. And as she watched the city, the distant motion of people, the faint curl of chimney smoke, the soft rhythm of life itself, she realized that Paris was no longer just a place of noise and movement. It was a living, breathing lullaby. Each sound, each sight, each tiny moment was part of a great, quiet music, one that could only be heard by those who had learned to slow down and listen. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the scent of rain, sunlight, and city air fill her lungs. When she exhaled, it was as though the last of her restlessness drifted away with her breath. The world was at peace, and she was part of it. Time passed gently, almost imperceptibly. The golden hue of the afternoon deepened into rose, then into violet, and finally into the quiet indigo of twilight. The first stars began to blink awake above the city, their faint silver light reflecting upon the dome of the basilica. Elise opened her eyes and looked down at the book in her lap. The cover shimmered faintly once more, as though touched by the same starlight that had begun to spill over the rooftops. When she opened it this time, she found one final line written across the last page. The story does not end when the page is turned. It continues softly, wherever the heart remembers to be still. She read the words slowly, her lips moving silently, and felt them settle deep within her like a lullaby. And as she closed the book, the sound of the city around her softened. Footsteps fading, laughter dimming, the air itself seeming to hush, until there was only the whisper of the evening breeze and the steady, soothing rhythm of her own breathing. She leaned back against the cool stone, her eyes drifting shut once more, the faint smile still lingering on her lips. The stars above Paris shone brighter now, scattered across the sky like whispers of dreams waiting to be gathered. And in that perfect stillness, between memory and sleep, between one breath and the next, Elise felt herself gently dissolving into the peace of the night, her heart completely at rest, the story still unfolding somewhere in the quiet, endless hush of dreams. Night had fully embraced the city now, its velvet darkness woven with threads of silver light that glimmered softly along the rooftops and windows, each reflection a quiet echo of the stars scattered across the vast Parisian sky. The world below had slowed to a tender murmur, and every sound seemed to float, gentle and unhurried. The distant hum of a passing car, the soft laughter of two voices fading down an alleyway, the rhythmic drip of water from an old iron gutter, marking time in a way that was almost hypnotic. Elise sat still upon the steps of Sacré-Cœur, her gaze resting upon the river of lights that flowed endlessly through the city below. The Seine, silver and fluid, curled like a dream through the heart of Paris, reflecting the lamplight and the pale glow of the moon in its slow, steady ripples. Somewhere far off, a violin played, faint, distant, carried by the breeze, its melody tender and melancholic, as if the night itself was sighing. She felt no need to move, no need to speak or think. Her hands rested lightly upon her lap, one still holding the pale blue book, the other tracing the faint texture of the stone step beside her. The coolness of the stone beneath her fingers grounded her, connecting her to the quiet, breathing rhythm of the earth. The air smelled faintly of rain still, mingled with the sweetness of blooming night jasmine from the gardens below. Above, the moon hung low and luminous, suspended like a watchful lantern over the city's rooftops. Its light was soft, milky, and complete. It smoothed every rough edge, deepened every shadow, and turned every building into a silhouette of quiet grace. The domes of Sacré-Cœur gleamed faintly. their pale surfaces catching the light and giving it back, as though whispering to the sky. For a moment, Elise closed her eyes and let the city speak to her in silence. She could hear it, the sigh of wind slipping through narrow streets, the creak of wooden shutters, the faint pulse of footsteps far below, the whisper of waves against the banks of the Seine. Paris was alive, yes, but softly alive, like a creature at rest, breathing deeply in its sleep. She felt her own breathing fall in rhythm with it. Slow, even, steady. Inhale, the cool air scented with stone and moonlight. Exhale, the warmth of the day, all its thoughts and little worries dissolving like mist. Her body relaxed deeper with every breath, her shoulders sinking, her hands going still, her heartbeat steady and light. She thought of the book in her lap, how it had appeared, how its words had seemed to guide her, not toward answers, but toward peace. She didn't know if the book had been real, or if it was something the city had dreamt into being for her. And somehow she realized it didn't matter. The stories that stay with us are not the ones we can explain. They're the ones that live quietly within us, shaping the way we breathe, the way we see, the way we soften toward the world. She opened the book one last time, slowly, as though turning the pages of her own memory. The parchment shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and though most of the pages were blank, she noticed faint imprints, traces of words that had once been there, stories she could no longer read, but could somehow still feel. And on the final page, written in that same delicate silver script, were the words, "Sleep is the language of the heart, where every dream is a quiet conversation with the soul." Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. She whispered the words softly, tasting their peace, and then she closed the book. The soft click of its cover closing was like the final note of a lullaby, a sound so small and gentle that it seemed to blend into the stillness of the night. The wind changed, just slightly, carrying the scent of the river, the perfume of rain-washed trees, and the faint sweetness of bread, baking in some distant corner bakery, preparing for morning. It brushed against Elise's face, lifted a strand of her hair, and wrapped around her like the softest of blankets. She leaned back, her eyes half-lidded now, her body sinking into the quiet comfort of the moment. The stone behind her held the last of the day's warmth, radiating softly against her spine. As she gazed upward, she saw the stars more clearly now, countless delicate points of light, each one flickering like a heartbeat across the dark expanse. And for just a breath it seemed to her that the stars were moving, ever so slightly, not falling, not twinkling, but breathing. In that breath, she felt something deep and certain, that all things in this world, from the smallest drop of rain to the widest stretch of sky, shared the same pulse. The same still, endless rhythm that rises and falls, just as the tide, just as the breath, just as the heart does in sleep. And when she exhaled again, her eyelids grew heavier. The sound of the violin drifted away. The city blurred into a wash of gold and silver. The night deepened, and Elise drifted with it. As her mind floated gently between waking and dream, she found herself standing once again before the little bookshop on Rue des Trois Frères. The rain was falling softly, not cold, but warm and whispering, like silk threads descending from the sky. The door of the shop was open, spilling golden light onto the wet street. She stepped inside, and there was the same scent: tea, ink, and rain-soaked paper, filling the air like a memory that had never left. The old man was there too, behind the counter, his eyes twinkling, as though he had been expecting her all along. "You've read the book," he said gently, his voice like the rustle of leaves. Elise nodded. "And what did you find?" he asked, though his tone was not one of curiosity but of quiet knowing. She thought for a moment before answering, her voice soft. "I think I found myself, the part of me that was always still even when the world around me wasn't." The old man smiled, his expression as kind as ever. "Then you've understood it," he said. "The book was never meant to tell you something new. It was only meant to remind you of what you already knew but had forgotten, that peace is not a place nor a moment, but a way of seeing." She smiled too, feeling tears rise behind her eyes, not of sadness, but of the quiet joy that comes from remembering something pure and eternal. He nodded once more, then gestured toward the door. "Go now," he said, his voice tender. "The city is sleeping, and you should rest with it. Keep the calm you've found, and it will follow you wherever you wake." She turned toward the doorway, and as she stepped outside, she felt the rain touch her skin. Cool, refreshing, almost luminous. The street was empty, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight. When she looked back, the shop was gone. Only the rain remained. The sound of rain slowly faded into the rhythm of her own breathing. She was no longer standing, but resting again upon the steps of Sacré-Cœur, her head tilted gently to one side, her eyes closed, her breath slow and deep. The book lay upon her lap, its cover faintly glowing in the moonlight until even that light dimmed, merging with the shadows around her. Above her, the stars continued their quiet dance, their soft, silver shimmer reflected in the curves of the river far below. The city, that ancient, dreaming heart, seemed to hum a lullaby beneath it all, a melody older than time, woven from peace, from silence, from the simple beauty of being alive. Her breathing slowed even more now. Each inhale was lighter, each exhale longer, deeper, easier. Her muscles softened completely. The tension melting from her neck, her shoulders, her arms, down through her hands and fingertips, through her chest and spine, through her legs, down to her feet. Her body had become weightless, carried by the rhythm of her breath, floating upon the quiet night air. Her mind grew soft, unfocused, wrapped in warmth and stillness. There were no thoughts now, only the slow, sweet descent into rest. And in that space between thought and dream, she felt it once more, that same pulse, the quiet heartbeat of the world. And she knew she was home. The final light of the moon slipped behind a drifting cloud, and the city of Paris, peaceful and eternal, seemed to sigh. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimed once, then faded into silence. The stars shimmered faintly as though whispering to her. Not words, not images, but a single, soothing feeling that spread through every corner of her being. Rest now. You are safe. You are loved. You are part of the quiet, and the quiet is infinite. As her last breath deepened, her consciousness dissolved fully into sleep. Slow, sweet and endless, her dreams flowing gently into the river of night, becoming one with the soft hum of Paris, the glow of the stars, and the whisper of the rain returning to the earth. And so, under the tranquil sky of Paris, Elise and you drift together into peaceful, unbroken sleep. The story ends, but the calm remains.